Hi, and welcome back to the Save It for Parts channel. In this video, I'm going to try taking a look for Mark Rober's recently launched satellite known as Sat Gus. Now, folks have been saying for a long time that some YouTuber needs to launch their own satellite, and someone finally did. Mark Rober of Squirrel Obstacle Course fame has put up Sat Gus, a CubeSat, or small satellite. Its main purpose is to take selfies using a couple of cell phones and send those selfies back to Earth. So folks can subscribe on Mark's Crunch Labs website, submit their selfie, and get those sent down. Now, this satellite launched pretty recently, and it has yet to get any tracking information online. Normally, new satellites get assigned a NORAD tracking number as well as a two-line element, or TLE. And this is kind of a holdover from the 1960s when satellite orbits were described on punch cards. The two-line element, or sometimes three-line element, is a derivative of that basically describes a satellite orbit in mathematical terms. So you can take that data, plug it into a prediction program like gpredict, plug it into a website like Into.io, or plug it into an astronomy program or mobile phone app like Stellarium. These are all websites and apps that I've used before to track satellites. Now, Mark Rober and the SatGus team have not released TLEs or a NORAD tracking number yet, and I don't know if those have actually been assigned yet by the Space Force or other agencies that track satellites. So I don't have a lot to go on as far as where this satellite is. We know a little bit about it, and we know broadly what radio frequencies it might use, because Mark Rober mentioned that in his channel, that it's going to use something like the 400 megahertz band for telemetry. That's just basic satellite health information. And then it's going to use the S-band, something around 2200 megahertz or 2.2 gigahertz for the actual data, the actual selfie images coming down. If you're familiar with my channel, you've seen me work with some of these frequencies before from other satellites, weather satellites, scientific satellites, US government stuff. It's just a really fun hobby to try to listen to some of these satellites, find out what they're sending down. Even the telemetry signals can be pretty interesting if they're open. If the company operating the satellite has released a decoder, you can find out really cool scientific stuff like solar panel performance, temperature of the satellite, battery status of the satellite, basic kind of scientific information if there are magnetometers or other sensors on the satellite. The telemetry can be surprisingly interesting and educational. The actual S-band payload data, the pictures that SatGus is going to be sending down, might be encrypted. We don't know. So as an amateur satellite enthusiast, I've been pretty excited to follow SatGus, and I'm looking forward to seeing it when it's completely operational, when it's starting to send down data. But I'd also like to snoop on it myself. I would like to aim an antenna at it, see are there any interesting radio signals it's sending down? Can we verify the orbit? Can we see any data from it? Even if we can't see the S-band payload, can we see the telemetry? Can we get anything interesting out of the telemetry? Will Mark or the team operating the satellite release a decoder for the telemetry? Well, those are all questions that I don't know. I did email Mark Rober, and I never heard back. I actually emailed him a couple times, but I know he's busy. He's got a lot of stuff going on, and I'm sure he's getting a lot of kind of casual emails like that asking about SatGus, so he can't respond to all of them. And the satellite itself will probably have some kind of a activation period or commissioning period where they make sure everything is working properly, everything comes down or up to the right temperature, the batteries start working properly, and once everything is reliably functional, then it will be an active satellite. Until that point, it's still kind of in an in-between phase. They might be testing out different radios, they might be switching over to backups if they need to if something failed, and they might be playing around with different encodings, different radio systems. So if we do get any radio signals from it, they might not be the final signal that it's going to send down permanently. They might just be an early testing thing. So I'm out here again with my S-band tracking antenna. This is built out of an old RV automatic satellite dish that I've hacked to follow low Earth orbit satellites. We're going to use this one to scope out the S-band spectrum, see if we can find any signals from that satellite on S-band. Now, this is kind of a long shot because I am not near any of the ground stations for this, so it probably won't be transmitting the full downlink dump. It might be transmitting some kind of real-time data, but with a CubeSat like this, that's less common. So we may or may not see anything with this antenna. I just figured I'd give it a shot. So that tracking antenna is hooked up to this laptop in the garage via a HackRF software-defined radio, and I'm running a program called HackRF Spectrum Analyzer. So this kind of increases the frequency range or the bandwidth that the HackRF can see by sweeping across
a set range of frequencies. We know from some online documentation that the Tyvak company uses a downlink S-band frequency of about 2200 to 2300 megahertz. So we'll set up the spectrum analyzer for that.
While I haven't found any official orbital data for Sat Gus, I did find some unofficial or preliminary orbital data. This comes from a forum called Eavesdrop, which was tracking the launch and recorded the TLE data at each satellite separation. This was SpaceX Transporter 12, which was kind of a rideshare mission launching 100 CubeSats, and the LibreSpace forum shared the TLEs of each object as it was ejected from the launch vehicle. So we do have the theoretical original TLE data for Sat Gus, and the sooner we can look for Sat Gus, the more accurate that preliminary TLE data will be.
Now the dish is going to stay pointing at Sat Gus, or at least where we think it is based on those TLEs that we got. Those TLEs have not been updated since the launch, and they are not official, so how accurate they are, I'm not really sure.
Now while that does its work, I'll be outside here with the UHF Yagi antenna trying to get the telemetry signal. Now that is something that should be transmitting pretty much all the time, and it's somewhere around 400 megahertz. Again, we don't know exactly, but there's a narrower range of frequencies that telemetry from satellites like this should be coming down, somewhere between 400 and 401 megahertz. So that's small enough that I can look at it with a different software-defined radio, the RTL SDR, and I can just look at that live on a laptop while I keep this antenna, directional Yagi antenna, aimed at the satellite, or again, where we think the satellite is. Hopefully we'll see something on the radio spectrum, but again, it's kind of a hunt here because we don't know the exact orbital elements, we don't know the exact frequency. By the way, I'm turning that thing into kind of a space pod prop or set or something. It's an ongoing project, but that's going to become basically a low-budget sci-fi spaceship in the future.
According to the TLEs we have, this should be a straight overhead pass, so that's pretty much optimal for getting any kind of a signal from it. A lot of this interference down here and this stuff up here is just from the camera. So if I get the antenna too close to the camera, there's lots of radio interference coming from that. This though, this looks interesting. This looks like it could be a satellite. The pass is not quite started yet, so this would be some other satellite though.
Well, we got something interesting on the screen. There was a regular pulse of data that seemed to be coming at regular intervals, and it did seem to be stronger when I was aimed at where Sat Gus is supposed to be, and it went away after Sat Gus theoretically stopped passing. So that's a good contender for the telemetry signal. However, it could also be from some completely unrelated satellite, so I really don't know yet.
All right, that signal is definitely Doppler shifted. It is decreasing in frequency, which makes sense for a moving satellite going past. It doesn't sound like anything, but it's just digital data. So these little data pulses could be Sat Gus telemetry right here. So I just started tracking the possible object that is Sat Gus. We're getting some kind of data here. I don't know if that is coming from the satellite or what this is exactly.
So I've mentioned these TLE files a couple times. Those are the 2-line or 3-line elements that describe a satellite's orbital data in mathematical terms, and they are not a static thing. They change. Satellite orbits can change based on all kinds of factors like gravitational effects, solar wind pressure, interactions with the Earth's atmosphere. If there's a big solar flare, that can actually inflate the Earth's atmosphere slightly and cause a little bit of drag on a satellite. So the orbits are not permanent. They decay over time, they change over time. Eventually, a small CubeSat like Sat Gus will fall out of the sky, burn up in the atmosphere, but that generally takes a couple years for even a small satellite like this. So the TLEs, for various reasons like that, can drift out of date. So a TLE that is a week old is probably still pretty valid. If it's a few weeks old or a month old, well, the satellite might not be in quite the same space. It might be a little bit ahead or behind of where your prediction program will say based on the outdated TLE. If you're trying to track a satellite using a radio antenna, if you're trying to aim an antenna at that satellite very precisely, then having up-to-date TLEs is pretty critical. One of the main problems with the last pass is that I was not 100% sure if I was aiming the antenna correctly at the satellite. So to eliminate that variable and to eliminate myself as a shaky, unreliable meat-based antenna rotor, I have hooked up the UHF Yagi antenna to my hacked Wineguard carryout. This used to be a little rooftop satellite dish for an RV. I've used it with other antennas like an L-band helicone, and now we're using it with the UHF antenna. So this little mount here spins around. I can control it with my laptop. I can run gPredict, which is a program that calculates satellite orbits. So we can plug in those TLE files for Sat Gus, or what we think is the TLE for Sat Gus. This setup is very similar to what I've used for the S-band antenna. We've got the code here running the Wineguard carryout dish. We've got gPredict telling it where to point based on the satellite orbit, and then we've got SDR++ over here listening to the 400 megahertz band. That's hooked up to our HackRF1 software-defined radio. These solid lines here are almost certainly interference from ground-based equipment. That's from power lines, possibly from my laptop, or even my camera, so we'll just have to ignore those. Some of these signals almost certainly are satellites, especially this one right here on the left of the yellow line. It's pretty hard to see, but it's decreasing in frequency and it's oscillating in a way that makes me think it's something spinning. So that might be a CubeSat that's just tumbling, and every so often we get a little stronger blip from it, and then the frequency is decreasing because of Doppler shift. So that's a pretty typical sign of a low Earth orbit satellite passing overhead. Okay, our satellite should be in line of sight of the antenna now, and it has started tracking. It's a little bit hard to tell because it moves so slowly during the first part of the pass, but it is starting to elevate just a little bit. Now, I'm not seeing anything definitive on the SDR screen yet. I'm just seeing those three intermittent interference patterns that we saw before, and then the steady interference patterns. I'm not seeing anything like the signal that we got last time. All right, well, unfortunately, we didn't get anything on that pass, and also my camera battery got so cold that it froze up, the camera quit. When I brought it back inside, everything frosted up. Just one of the occupational hazards of trying to do satellite work in Minnesota in February. All right, so I did actually send in a selfie for Sat Gus to take in space, and instead of myself, I used the cats here, Donnie and Fluff. They have their own YouTube channel, it's pretty small, and they show up in this channel pretty frequently because they like to be involved in everything I do, and they're usually right on top of my workspace. They're right on top of the keyboard. So Donnie and Fluff here are my good little helpers, and I figured they deserve to have a space selfie more than I do. I think I need to set this project aside for the moment. As I film this right now, it's been a month since Sat Gus launched, and we still don't have a NORAD number. We don't have any accurate tracking information. Hi, Fluff. Fluff here is in the selfie that I sent to Mark Rober to put on Sat Gus, so she and her friend Donnie are definitely looking forward to getting their selfies back, so we'll wait for that. We'll see what happens with the satellite, and hopefully somebody gets a NORAD number assigned, gets the TLE data uploaded so that websites like Into.io, programs like gPredict can track the satellite, and then we can come back and look at it again. We can see if it's transmitting telemetry, if we can do anything interesting with that telemetry, and at a long shot, if we can do anything with the S-band download, if we can even see it here in Minnesota. Again, this whole project has been a lot of ifs. It's very early in the process. We don't know basically anything about the satellite, and that's pretty typical for new satellite launches. They take a while to activate, to get everything working. There's not always a lot of information released early on. So this is not anything out of the ordinary. It's not anything weird. It's just kind of how satellite launches work. You don't often hear about them once they've gone into space until everything is working 100% and they've started sending down their scientific data, their product, or whatever else they're designed to do. So we'll have to wait for that, and maybe we can come back to that in a future video and hopefully show off something interesting relating to Sat Gus, because I'm personally pretty interested in it. I know some folks out there in the amateur satellite community are interested in it. People interested in YouTube stuff are looking forward to this, and it's just a really cool project. Check out my other videos if you want to see other satellite projects, and make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see future satellite adventures and whatever else we get up to. Thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.